Hey guys, tonight we drift down into the realm of forgotten myths, stories buried not by time, but by choice. You're lying there, maybe in your bed or on your favorite chair, and the night hums softly around you. Above, stars flicker like the faded memory of a name you can't quite place. Olympus looms somewhere high above the clouds, but we're not going there, not yet. Instead, you wander beneath it into the shadowy folds of myth where old goddesses wait unnamed, unpraised. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And if you're tuning in from somewhere special, maybe beneath the northern lights, or just curled up in a quiet New York apartment, post your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The stones beneath your feet feel ancient, smooth from centuries of wind and footsteps. The air is perfumed with lavender and old dust. Somewhere nearby, an owl stirs in the olive branches. You find yourself walking toward a ruined temple, half swallowed by time, columns broken like snapped ribs, ivy threading through the crumbling walls. It's one of those places not listed on tourist maps. The signs are in a dialect no longer spoken, carved in letters, just familiar enough to unsettle you. At the heart of this ghostly sanctuary is a plinth. No statue, no offering bowls, just traces of ash and the softest indentation, as if someone once knelt here in prayer for a very, very long time. You run your fingers across the base. The name has been scratched out, deliberately, not weather-worn but erased. Someone once worshipped a queen here, not Hera, not Athena. Someone older, someone quieter, someone forgotten. There's something different about this myth. It doesn't blare trumpets or hurl thunderbolts. It exhales, it waits, it hums under your skin like déjà vu. You didn't learn her name in school, and no action figure ever bore her likeness. Yet here she lingers in the dust and the dark, as if daring you to remember. A tiny mosaic catches your eye. Most of it has flaked off, but what's left reveals a woman in profile curly hair, coiled like a storm cloud, eyes half-lidded, and a crown not of gold but of birds, doves maybe, or falcons. It's hard to tell. Historians still argue whether this crumbled temple belonged to Dione Metis or some local goddess whose name was eaten by time. The line between them blurs. One theory says all three are facets of the same deity, like light, striking a prism refracted into different colors by male-dominated myth. You step deeper into the ruins. A chill presses in, not unfriendly, just aware. It feels like someone is watching, but not menacingly. No, this is more like the gaze of a grandmother you forgot you had patient, mildly amused and definitely unimpressed with your current haircut. A breeze carries the scent of time and wet stone. The air hums. For a moment, just a moment, you hear something. Music. No chanting closer. It's like distant voices humming in unison, an ancient lullaby sung by priestesses long turned to dust. One curious thing, in a buried cache near Dodona, archaeologists once found lead tablets etched with whispered prayers not to Zeus but to a goddess, a feminine force older than Olympus. Her name was half erased, but part of it remained, Ione. Coincidence maybe, or maybe not. You touch the stone again, warm. That's strange. The sun set hours ago. You step backward, then forward again, your shadow stretching into the broken sanctum. The ground feels softer now, almost pulsing, like it remembers being holy. A cat slinks past you, black and elegant tail curled like a question mark. It pauses just long enough to look you dead in the eyes, then without ceremony it curls up on the altar and begins to nap. as if this place was never meant for thunder or blood, but for peace, for dreams. You start to wonder what makes a goddess vanish. Is it lack of worship, political rebranding, or simply being inconvenient to the narrative? Greek mythology is full of edits. That's the quiet part they don't put in museum placards. The pantheon, we know, the 12 Olympians neatly seated on clouds, is a cleaned-up version, an ancient PR campaign polished over centuries. There were others, many others, some swallowed, some renamed, some quietly left behind like toys in the attic. You take another step forward and feel something shift, not in the temple. In you, there's an ache behind your eyes, like a memory pressing against the back of your skull. You don't remember learning this story, and yet some part of you recognizes it, like walking into a room you've never seen, but instinctively knowing where everything belongs. That's the thing about forgotten queens. They don't vanish, they wait in the stones, in half-remembered lullabies, in dreams. And tonight, whether by accident or invitation, you've started to remember her. The one before Hera. The queen who ruled before rule had robes and marble and thunderbolts, and somewhere beyond the clouds, beyond Olympus, she opens one eye. Just slightly. The temple dissolves behind you as the scene shifts, not suddenly, not jarringly, but like turning the page of a very old, very heavy book. You're walking now through a thicket of cypress and laurel, your step soft against the mossy path. The stars above have rearranged themselves, subtly unfamiliar. The night grows warmer, quieter, heavier with possibility. And then through the trees you see it, a shimmer, a flicker, a stranger. She stands beneath a broken archway, not looking at you, but waiting as if she knew you'd come. Her robe is not white like the marble statues. It's indigo shot through with tiny flecks of silver stars woven into fabric. Around her shoulders drapes a mantle of dove's feathers, soft and half-glowing. She wears no crown, yet her presence presses against your ribs like gravity. She doesn't speak, not yet, but the silence around her tightens, then softens like a breath drawn in. You've heard of Hera, Queen of Olympus, wife of Zeus, perpetually betrayed, perpetually majestic. But this woman, she's different, not embittered, not vengeful. Older maybe, or perhaps not older in years but in kind, like the difference between wine and water. One sits, waits, deepens. A carved column behind her still bears faint, weather-worn words, Thea Kai Basilissa, goddess and queen. The name beneath is broken off, erased. You feel it in your stomach like a missed step on a staircase. Some say she was Dione, others say she was Metis. Still others argue she was a regional deity, the earth mother of Dodona, or a Pelasgian goddess folded into the mythology later like raisins into bad fruit cake. Historians still argue whether this mysterious figure was ever a queen in the Olympian sense at all, or simply a powerful remnant of pre-Hellenic religion absorbed and renamed to keep the locals cooperative. You take a step closer. She vanishes, poof. Okay, not in a terrifying horror movie way, more in the blink and she's gone category, like a dream when you wake up too fast. You're left standing in a clearing surrounded by ancient stones, altars once painted, now bare. No peacocks, no thunderbolts, no golden thrones, just the scent of myrrh and a lingering warmth, as if someone had been sitting there moments ago telling stories older than language. You lean against a column catching your breath, not from exhaustion but from awe. She wasn't wearing the trappings of Olympus, no dramatic lightning flash, no resounding declarations of divine justice, no tiny golden harp music, which honestly would have been a little much. Instead, you felt seen. And somehow that's more unsettling, because in the myths we remember gods are grand and loud and emotionally unstable, but the ones we forget, they're quiet, patient, rooted in something slower, more intimate. The kind of divine that doesn't demand worship, but watches how you treat your neighbor when no one's looking. You sit on a crumbled step and think, what if she really was a queen? What if there was once a hierarchy where Zeus wasn't the inevitable apex, but just another name in a long, tangled line of sky fathers, each one marrying or devouring the queens before them, a quirky tidbit. In some regional myths, Dione was worshipped not as a goddess of love or prophecy or wisdom, but as a sort of divine mediator, a presence invoked when disputes grew too ugly for even the gods to settle. Imagine needing divine arbitration because Ares borrowed your sword and melted it into a weird love offering for Aphrodite. Again, the more you sit, the more the air around you thickens, not oppressively, comfortingly, like the air in a greenhouse, dense, fragrant, protective. The stranger's shape flickers again just at the corner of your eye. This time you don't turn. You let her stay in the periphery. That's how old goddesses move, sideways, backwards, through veils and reflections and the heavy pauses between thunder. And then it hits you. The shimmering woman didn't vanish. She shifted from figure to presence, from story to atmosphere. She's still here, in the sway of the cypress leaves, in the faint sound of doves fluttering somewhere far off, in the stones beneath your palms, warmed from within like a heartbeat. She's not waiting to be found. She never left. She just stopped introducing herself. Because over time, as myths were polished, streamlined, and sold back to people like mass-produced furniture, there wasn't room for the odd, ambiguous, quietly powerful ones. So they were uninvited, unnamed, absorbed. Somewhere in the footnotes of history, her name is crossed out with ink that tried very hard to be permanent. But it didn't work. You're here, aren't you? Still listening, still remembering. The stars blink above. A constellation rearranges, one you don't recognize, or maybe one that hasn't been named yet. A night breeze pulls your hair gently, almost affectionately. You imagine her brushing it back from your face with hands soft as shadows. No throne, no temple, just you, and the shimmer of a queen who refuses to be forgotten. The forest thins around you and the moss gives way to marble slabs half sunk in earth and time. The path widens not in welcome, but in memory, as though your footsteps trigger an ancient recollection. You're not carving a way forward. You're walking backward into a myth that once wore a different face. The wind murmurs names you've never heard. Not Zeus, not Hera, not even Cronus or Rhea. These names have edges like obsidian and rhythms like lullabies sung underwater. One of them makes your skin prickle, not from fear, but from recognition, so deep it has no words. You're no longer in the temple's shadow. Now you stand in a grove, shaped like a spiral trees coiled like dancers mid-pose. And in the center, a cracked, throne-like stone that isn't quite a throne. Too low to be regal, too deliberate to be random. It's the kind of seat someone used not to rule from, but to listen. And here the story shifts again. Before the gods sat atop Olympus with their chiseled physiques and excellent branding, the world was messy. There were no neat family trees or stately thrones. The cosmos teemed with primordial beings shifting, overlapping, marrying ideas with forms and giving birth to metaphors as much as to monsters. It was a chaotic, divine soup, which, let's be honest, is kind of refreshing. In that soup, power wasn't yet codified. There was no clear Zeus-like figure calling the shots. There were titans, nymphs, monsters, stars with feelings and concepts so slippery they needed 20 scrolls just to be poorly explained. And here's where you find her. This queen, whoever she was, didn't rule Olympus, not yet. She presided over something more ancient, more intimate, the first murmurs of divine consciousness. Maybe she was one of the original goddesses who held power, not through thunder or war, but through memory, prophecy, and persuasion. Soft power, the kind that makes kings pause before speaking. Historians still debate whether early Greek communities believed in a singular queen of the gods before Hera's cult became dominant. Some scholars propose that goddesses like Dione or even Rhea held broader, less defined domains, motherhood, fertility, wisdom, woven together through ritual and repetition, not hierarchy. You can imagine her walking among the people, not aloof and aloof on a celestial throne, but woven into daily life. A whisper at the well, a prayer in childbirth, a breath before decisions, and then change. Zeus arrives on the scene, not as a beardy thunder thrower just yet. No early Zeus is a sky spirit still growing into his ego, still charming his way into myths like a charismatic substitute teacher who brings his own snacks. He doesn't crash onto Olympus fully formed. He sidles in, collecting allies, consorts, and credibility. And that's when things get complicated. Because he doesn't arrive alone. He's linked intimately to several early goddesses. You hear names like Themis, Metis, Eurynome, and one name over and over in the cracks between myths, Dione. No one can quite agree who she was. A consort, a sister, a shadow. Some say Dione was a goddess of moisture or dew, because of course Greek myth needs a deity for literally everything, including things that evaporate before you finish saying their name. But others believe she was the feminine aspect of Zeus himself, not his wife, not his rival, his mirror. You trace your fingers along the stone in front of you. It hums faintly, not electrically, emotionally, like it remembers being important. The spiral grove around you flickers just a little as if the past is testing whether you're paying attention. You are. This forgotten queen wasn't forgotten because she was weak. She was forgotten because she didn't fit the marketing plan. You know, the 112 gods seated perfectly family, drama like a soap opera, thunderbolts and war chariots, all very sponsored by Olympus team. But before the campaign, before the slogans, there were groves like this, places where her name was spoken in the open, not whispered, places where a goddess could rule not with dominion, but with presence. There's a quirky theory among fringe scholars that the spiral grove was an early metaphor for divine learning, not ascending a mountain, but spiraling inward toward knowing. In this model, queens like Dione weren't above or below, they were within, coiling through the mind like intuition or scent or memory. You stand there listening. The trees creak softly, the wind sighs, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, you sense her again. Not as a figure this time, but as a feeling. The way the hair on your arm rises before a storm. The way you just know someone is looking at you across a crowded room. The way you remember a face in a dream that never really ended. And maybe, just maybe, she's the reason you're here. Not because you needed a bedtime story, but because she needed a witness. The spiral grove fades behind you as though the trees themselves exhale and retreat. You're walking again, though you don't remember standing up. Funny how time behaves differently in myth. You could be slipping backward through millennia or forward into something yet unnamed. Either way, your feet lead you toward another glimmer in the distance. This time, it's a garden, not the kind with tidy rows or gurgling fountains. This garden is wild, unkempt. Every vine, every bloom seems to stretch in slow rebellion against order. Poppies tangle with pomegranates. Lavender erupts beside thorns. A fig tree has split a stone in half its roots, patient and unapologetic. And in the center of it all, 9 figures dance, not with ribbons or tambourines, no synchronized choreography, just movement flowing loose like water, remembering how to be a wave. Their laughter is quiet like wind, brushing against tall grass. These are the Muses, you know them, Calliope, Clio, Erato, all the poetic overachievers of Olympus's arts department. But they aren't alone. There's another woman sitting beneath the fig tree arms, wrapped around her knees, smiling with a weariness that feels eerily familiar. She doesn't dance, she watches, and the Muses orbit her like moons around an old planet. You recognize her, or rather, you recognize the story about her. Mnemosyne, the titaness of memory, the one who birthed the Muses after a 9-night affair with Zeus. 1 night for each muse, which honestly feels like overachieving even by divine standards. But tonight, something feels off. The usual story has Mnemosyne fading into the background, a one-time wonder, mother of culture but not part of Olympus's main cast. And yet here she sits, radiant, calm, watching her daughters spin through time. Then beside her, another woman materializes, or perhaps was always there, simply ignored. This one is harder to name. Her face shifts slightly every time you blink, first stern, then warm, then unreadable. She doesn't speak. Instead, she holds something in her lap, a scroll, its words alive, curling like smoke. Every time you squint, a different name flickers across its surface. Metis, Dione, Eurynome, Mnemosyne. Maybe they are separate, maybe they are the same. The myths don't always agree. Historians still argue whether these shadow goddesses represent distinct cults merged over time, or if they're fractured reflections of one vast feminine archetype split apart by patriarchal storytelling, like stained glass, shattered and rearranged into neat, male-led pantheons. You take a seat on a sun-warmed stone not far from the fig tree. The woman with the scroll looks up just once, and you feel it, the gravity, the density of forgotten stories pressed behind her eyes. And here's where things start to click. Mnemosyne is memory, yes, but what's memory without presence, without voice, without power? There's a theory whispered among the bolder classicists that Zeus' original consort wasn't Hera or even Metis, but memory itself. Not just the titaness Mnemosyne, but a deeper embodiment of wisdom stored, retrieved, and wielded like a weapon. The mind before the lightning bolt. In some versions, Zeus goes to Mnemosyne not just for pleasure, but for instruction. To learn, to remember his role, his destiny, his story, which if true would make memory, not might, the foundation of rule. Quirky sidebar. In certain local cults, initiates of the Eleusinian mysteries were told to drink from 2 rivers in the underworld. One was Lethe, forgetting, the other Mnemosyne, remembrance. The goal wasn't amnesia, it was to remember who you really were. And if Mnemosyne was that important, what happened to her? Why isn't she on Olympus? The scroll shifts again. The letters curl into symbols, then into images, then into a dove which flutters out of her lap and into the sky like punctuation from another age. You watch it go mesmerized. The woman, whoever she is, smiles gently. Not because you understand, but because you want to. She presses a finger to her lips. You get it. Some stories aren't forgotten. They're hidden on purpose, not out of shame, but protection, because memory, real memory, is dangerous. It questions, it complicates, it asks things like, why does Hera sit on the throne instead of Dione? Why was Metis devoured when she was the one advising the gods? Why does no one remember the queen who came before the branding and thunder? And here in this wild garden of unruly blooms and laughing daughters, you sense the answer. They do remember, the muses remember, the scroll remembers, the fig tree remembers. They just need someone to ask. You sit a little longer. The sun never quite sets here. It hovers at the horizon, golden and hesitant like a storyteller not quite ready to stop. Eventually the muses drift away, their laughter echoing off unseen walls. The scroll curls shut with a sound like a sigh. You stand. The two women beneath the tree do not follow. They nod once each, regal, grateful. You walk on, carrying memory now like a gift in your pocket, and somewhere behind you a queen begins to hum. The laughter of the muses lingers behind you like the scent of sweet smoke after a candle's been snuffed. You walk through a passage now, narrow, rocky, damp, a path carved not by feet, but by water and time. The walls shimmer faintly with lichen, and somewhere in the darkness a drip echoes like a metronome for a forgotten ritual. You follow it because it's the only sound and because you trust that in myth direction isn't found on a map, it's felt in the bones. And then suddenly light, not brilliant, not divine, just enough to see her. She sits on a ledge above a dark pool, ankles crossed, one hand trailing through the still water. She doesn't look up. She doesn't have to. You know it's her. She wears no jewelry, no golden laurels, just a thin wrap of fabric and hair, like night caught in wind. Around her the cave breathes cool, damp, ancient. You've found her, the queen without a throne. Her presence is impossible to ignore, but also impossible to name. That's how the oldest goddesses move. They don't demand shrines or marble columns. They wait quiet and immovable until someone notices. And you do. You notice the offerings at her feet, smooth stones, scraps of cloth, half-rotted fig. These aren't grand gifts. They're intimate ones, the kind a person leaves when they don't need their neighbors to know. Tokens whispered into the dark, not shouted from temple steps. In ancient texts, fragments really, there are mentions of rites performed in caves like this. Rituals for deities not officially listed on Olympus, local queens, earth mothers, old spirits woven from soil and rain. Scholars call them chthonic goddesses, which is a fancy way of saying underground, but not gone. Some believe these goddesses were once powerful in their own right, but lost prominence when patriarchal Olympian cults began to formalize. Their myths were overwritten or fused into more acceptable figures. Think of it as ancient mythological rebranding. One of the oldest temples in Greece, far older than the Parthenon, is at Dodona. It wasn't dedicated to Zeus, not originally. It was for Dione. People came to whisper questions to oak trees, believing the rustling leaves carried the voice of a goddess who answered not with thunder but with patience. Historians still argue whether this Dione was ever considered the consort of Zeus or his predecessor. Some even suggest she was the mother of Aphrodite in early accounts, but like all inconvenient female figures in myth, her role was, let's say, adjusted over time. You edge closer to the pool and crouch beside it. Your reflection ripples, then steadies, then shifts. It's not your face anymore, it's hers. Not the goddess above, but the one from before, from long before. She's older than grief, older than language. And in her gaze you feel something strange. She's not asking to be remembered. She's asking if you remember who you are. No pressure. You try to speak. You want to ask her name, but the question feels unnecessary, even a little rude, like asking a mountain its address. So instead, you just sit. You breathe. You remember, and that's when it happens. From deep within the pool, a glow begins to rise, soft violet, like bruised moonlight. It doesn't light the cave, it reveals it. Every crack, every shimmer of mineral in the wall, every spiderweb trembling in silence. And carved into the stone behind the goddess are names. Dozens, maybe hundreds, faint, layered, eroded, many crossed out, others nearly gone. But all of them feminine. You lean in and read what you can. Metis, Eurynome, Leto, Dione, Nemi, Cybele, Rhea, Gaia. And beneath them the same phrase carved again and again in slightly different dialects she was before. It's not a boast, it's a statement of fact, neutral, steady, like the heartbeat of the world. The goddess finally turns towards you. Her eyes are dark, but not in the scary villain way. They're dark, the way deep water is dark, because there's more in them than you could ever see at once. She smiles not warmly, not coldly, but with a kind of cosmic amusement, like someone who once watched stars being born and then got very good at not taking things too seriously. "Go on," she whispers. Her voice is like moss brushing stone. "They've told you their stories, now hear mine." And just like that she's gone, not vanished, just withdrawn, like a wave receding into the ocean it came from. You're alone now, but not empty. You walk back out of the cave the way you came, and, as the daylight meets you, you realize something has changed, not in the world, but in you. You are no longer here to learn the myth. You are here to carry it, to remember the queen who never asked for a throne, but held the stories anyway. The cave exhales behind you as you step into the open air, and the light feels different now, richer, like it's been strained through amber. The trees stretch tall and silent, the earth warm beneath your feet. You're not on a path anymore. The land decides where you go, and you don't resist. You trust it now, this rhythm of myth that walks alongside you like a shadow with ancient sandals. There's a road ahead, though it's more suggestion than structure. Pebbled, overgrown, barely trodden. And as you follow it, you begin to feel the shape of a story curling around you again. This time it starts with a boy. A young god raw with hunger and ambition, his hair tousled like a storm that hasn't yet decided where to land. Zeus. Not the Zeus yet, no statues, no marble jawline, no lawmaker with a lightning bolt in each hand, and a cult following on every hilltop. Just Zeus, untamed, clever, dangerous, in the way that only the very young can be. You catch glimpses of him through the trees, barefoot, laughing, stealing honey from a shrine, then vanishing before anyone can scold him. He's charismatic, sure, but not entirely trustworthy. The kind of guy who shows up to a feast with no food but still ends up leading the toast. And even in this early form he has a habit, maybe a flaw, of aligning himself with power and then absorbing it, not always maliciously. Sometimes just instinctively, like a fire taking on dry wood. You follow him as he ascends through myth, not a straight climb, but a weaving dance, courting, tricking, battling, and always entangling himself with goddesses who held the very traits he lacked. There's Themis, the embodiment of divine law, Eurynome, goddess of the ocean's wide dance, Mnemosyne, mother of the Muses, and Metis, his match in cunning. Each one gives him something, a piece of power, a skill, a mask, and then Metis. You find yourself on the shore of a strange sea. The sand is violet, as if someone spilled crushed grapes across the earth. The water is calm, mirror-smooth, and stretching endlessly into dusk. There she stands, Metis. The name means cunning, or more poetically wise counsel. She's not grand in appearance, no dramatic wings or glowing auras. She looks like someone who's been underestimated most of her life and decided to use that to her advantage. Her smile could slice marble. You remember the tale, don't you? Metis was Zeus' first partner, and by some accounts his first wife. The one who helped him trick Cronus into vomiting up his siblings. The one who stood beside him when the world was still shaky and unformed. She advised. She schemed. She whispered strategies into his ear that tilted the universe. And what did he do? He swallowed her. Yes, just gulp, consumed her whole, when he learned she was destined to bear a child more powerful than him. It's the divine equivalent of thanks for the resume now, please. Vanish. Scholars still debate what this myth means. Was it literal, metaphorical? Was it a way to explain Athena's odd birth, from Zeus's skull no less, or a symbolic act of masculine dominance over female wisdom? Some argue it was a narrative innovation, an attempt to contain feminine agency by placing it inside the male god's body. Others suggest it reveals Zeus's fear not just of prophecy but of collaboration, the kind where both parties are equal and he can't control the outcome. You sit near the water's edge. Metis watches you. She doesn't speak, but she doesn't need to. You feel her legacy seeping into the sand, not gone, just internalized, like a language once spoken by everyone and now understood by few. Here's the quirky part. In some early Orphic traditions, Metis doesn't just vanish. She lives inside Zeus, continuing to advise him, shaping his thoughts, refining his power, which makes you wonder who really ruled Olympus. Maybe that's the question this whole myth is dodging. What if Zeus only seemed sovereign because the first queens fed him the tools? And what if one of them, maybe Metis, maybe Dione, maybe a goddess, older than names, was meant to share the throne, not just prepare it for him? You look back out to sea, the sky melts into it, a perfect, endless gradient. Metis lifts one hand barely, and the surface ripples. You see Athena's face, then Hera's, then others, flickers of goddess upon goddess, all with traces of Metis behind their eyes, as if every wise woman in Olympus carries her ghost. You stand brushing the violet sand from your palms. Metis turns away, dissolving into the horizon, not lost, absorbed, echoing in every divine judgment, every clever stratagem, every thought before action. She was never erased, just hidden in plain sight. And as you walk on, you wonder not who came first, but who lasted longer, because swallowed or not, Metis is still whispering. You leave the violet shoreline behind, and the path bends again, not forward or back, but inward, as if myth itself were a spiral staircase curling through time and memory. The air shifts, warmer, thicker, like the stillness just before thunder cracks open the sky. You're climbing now, up a slope strewn with marble debris and twisted roots. You pass fragments of wings, fingers curled in half-buried fists, and eyes carved into stone eyes that watched empires rise and fall, temples built and burned, names etched, then scratched out. And at the summit, standing in the hush before the storm, you find her. Metis, again, but not alone. She stands just out of reach beside Zeus, young still, but heavier now. His eyes shine with something new, not curiosity, but calculation. He watches her, listens to her nods along with her every suggestion. But there's something in the set of his jaw, a tightness, a flicker of fear masquerading as admiration. You've seen this look before. It's the face of a man grateful for the ladder he plans to kick over. They walk together, queen and rising king, trading plans, weaving futures from threads no mortal could see. Metis gestures to the horizon. Zeus nods and pretends he saw it first. And then the dream stutters. The moment blurs, the sky darkens. You know what's coming, the swallowing. Not symbolic, not metaphorical, literal, at least in the way myths make literal. Zeus opens his mouth wide as prophecy whispers in his ear. Metis is fated to bear a child more powerful than its father. And just like that snap his decision is made, he swallows her. Just like Cronus swallowed his own children, you'd think they'd learn. But here's where things get messy. Some versions say Zeus tricked her, invited her to transform into a fly or a drop of water, then gulped her down in one go. Others claim she allowed it. Volunteered, a sacrificial act of power, a queen who knew that stepping inside a tyrant was the only way to temper him. Historians still argue whether Metis was victim or strategist. Did she lose herself? Or did she win in the long game, embedding herself in the very heart of Olympus? You tilt your head and try to hear what he hears, and yes, there it is, a voice faint but firm, echoing within Zeus. Metis isn't gone. She's thinking for him now. She's shaping his laws, framing his judgments, even whispering the blueprint for Athena, the daughter who will never call her mother but carry her mind all the same. You see the irony, right? The god who feared being overthrown by wisdom now carries wisdom inside him, like a cursed treasure, or a Trojan horse in reverse. Quirky tidbit. In early iconography, Zeus was sometimes shown with a second face, or a bulge in his forehead, symbols of Metis's lingering presence. Imagine going through eternity with your ex living rent-free in your skull. You smile just a little. And now the skies shift again. Thunder groans in the distance, not with anger, but anticipation. The moment before Athena's birth. This is the part everyone remembers, the grand finale. Zeus's massive headache, the splitting of his head with a hammer because Greek medicine was basically just DIY carpentry, and Athena springing forth in full armor, shouting war cries before she even learned how to blink. But what they don't say Metis was there too, not just inside, but through Athena, sharp-eyed, just terrifyingly rational. A goddess of war, yes, but strategic war, measured, clean, almost surgical. Athena never rampages, she calculates. That's Metis. You stand at the edge of this thunderous moment, watching the myth unfold. Zeus triumphant, Athena radiant, Olympus reshaped. But no one looks back. No one asks where is Metis now, because she's too deep to see. Not in the heavens, not in the underworld, but behind every thought Zeus claims as his own, every decree Athena makes in his name, every scrap of order this pantheon tries to stitch over its chaos. She's the ghost in the god machine, the queen still reigning not from a throne, but from a whisper. You feel the wind shift around you, and a single feather flutters to the ground, silver-edged, almost sharp enough to cut. It lands at your feet like a signature. You pick it up, pocket it, walk on. The sky above rumbles, and somewhere deep inside Olympus, a voice that hasn't spoken aloud in eons hums softly to herself. not in grief, not in rage, but in patience, because queens like Metis don't need to be remembered to rule. They just need someone to keep listening. You descend from the thunderous heights, feather in your pocket, thoughts still echoing with the sound of a skull splitting open to birth a goddess. The path shifts again, not toward Olympus, but deeper into the shadows that cling to its base. Down here, the air feels older, denser. Like myth before editing, the trees grow crooked and stubborn. The moss glows faintly blue in the fading light. You brush past a low-hanging branch and realize it isn't a branch, it's a snake coiled and blinking as if it too remembers. And just ahead, a clearing, circular, carved with purpose. At its center, a stone well covered in a lattice of ivy, and beside it, nothing. No figure, no goddess, just silence. But your skin tells you otherwise. There's someone here. She doesn't announce herself with lightning or the clash of armor. There's no peacock screeching, no dramatic wind, just the sense of presence. That eerie certainty that someone is looking at you from behind the veil of your own memory. This perhaps is Dione, or what's left of her. It's strange, isn't it, how easily the name slips past most people. Dione, the maybe mother of Aphrodite, the maybe wife of Zeus, the maybe titaness of something vague and feminine like moisture or oracles or dignity. The myths can't quite pin her down, which means, of course, she must have once been powerful, because you don't overwrite what's irrelevant, you overwrite what threatens the narrative. There's a scholarly debate, one of those long, sleepy academic knife fights fought through footnotes and increasingly passive-aggressive conference panels about whether Dione is actually the original goddess of the Oracle at Dodona. You know Dodona, or maybe you don't. It's the oracle you didn't hear about in school because Delphi got all the press. But before Apollo took over the prophecy business, Dodona was sacred and silent. People didn't consult priests. They consulted rustling leaves, the murmurs of doves, the creaking of sacred oaks, and who interpreted those whispers? Women. The Seloi priestesses, barefoot and unwashed by tradition, devoted to Dione, or maybe Gaia, or maybe both, because the myths aren't clear. Which is its own kind of clarity. You kneel by the old well and lean in. No water, just echoes. You try her name on your tongue, Dione. It tastes like stone and smoke and the sigh of someone who was never quite allowed to finish speaking. A fringe theory, and let's be honest, those are the most fun, suggests Dione wasn't just a goddess. She was the goddess, the female counterpart to Zeus before Hera was invented, a primordial queen in a two-person pantheon long before thrones and temples and thunderbolts. You sit with that idea that maybe at one time there wasn't king of the gods and his jealous wife. Maybe there was just them equal elemental, sky and earth, word and echo, thunder and tide. And then slowly Dione was pushed sideways, not violently, subtly, her traits divided, her rituals given new names, her voice filtered through Apollo's rising cult, her image softened until she was just Aphrodite's ambiguous mom in a footnote. You imagine her sitting on the rim of this well watching as new myths were written. Not bitter, just amused. Like someone who knows the author is going to miss the best parts. There's a statue nearby, half buried under moss and root. You brush it off. It's a woman, seated, barefooted, hands open. No crown, no weapon, just presence. And her eyes, they're carved to look away from the viewer, as if she's not posing for worship. She's listening, And it dawns on you maybe that was her power all along. Not dominion, reception. She heard things, felt them, channeled them into prophecy, into wisdom, into warnings no one wanted to heed. You look up. The trees sway softly in the dusk. Doves flutter overhead, cooing low and slow like distant drums. The wind hums a name, not in Greek or Latin, but in the language of leaves and shadows. You listen, you remember, and the clearing begins to change. You see not just one goddess, but flickers of many, layered, woven, stitched together through centuries of storytelling like a divine quilt. Metis, Dione, Mnemosyne, Gaia, each one once whole, each one slowly split, pared down, reassigned like departments in a celestial bureaucracy. You rise from the well and step back into the world. But the silence follows, not empty, full, a kind of sacred hush that wraps around the shoulders like a shawl passed down from generations of queens who ruled before thrones, before Olympus, before myth found its favorite 12. You don't need her to appear again. She's already here. You're walking with her now. And she is very, very patient. You walk on, and the world softens beneath your steps as though the earth itself is exhaling. The trees part gently, revealing a sunken path flanked by stone walls etched with crumbling reliefs, faces blurred by rain hands, outstretched in gestures of offering or farewell. You move through them like a ghost among ghosts, each carving a whisper from the past. This is no grand avenue. It feels quiet, almost private. A road walked not by crowds of worshippers, but by a select few, those who remembered even after the world forgot. And then, in the hush, between two breaths, you find her name again. Dione, carved low on a flat stone partly obscured by a gnarled fig root. Not gilded, not scented. Almost an afterthought, almost, but not quite. You crouch beside it, fingers tracing the worn letters. They're delicate, almost tender, as though carved by someone who didn't just revere her, but knew her. Someone who understood what it meant to leave a name in a place where it might one day be found by someone like you. You look up and realize you're standing at the edge of what was once a shrine. No roof, no columns left standing, just scattered stones and an unnatural stillness that makes the hairs on your neck rise in that curious, reverent way. There's a single olive tree growing from the center. Old, weathered, its roots clutched around a basin that might once have held oil or water or wine, whichever sacrifice suited the queen, whose presence now vibrates like a string plucked just beneath your ribs. You sit, and you listen. To what you're not sure, the wind, the tree. The memory of a goddess, maybe all of it. There's a story rarely told about a time before Olympus was Olympus, when the gods still mingled freely with the titans and the lines between divine and natural were fuzzier than a philosopher's beard. In those early myths, Dione wasn't anyone's side character. She was central. Some traditions place her among the titans, others make her daughter of Gaia. Some claim she was born from the ocean foam alongside Aphrodite, or even birthed Aphrodite before Zeus laid claim to the goddess of love's origin story. Historians still argue whether Dione was a full deity or a local variation of the Great Mother archetype, a kind of divine placeholder, reshaped again and again by changing politics language and gender roles. But here's a thought: maybe she didn't lose status, maybe she simply withdrew. You've met people like that, quiet forces who never needed a throne to shape the room. The ones who watch, listen, absorb. They aren't erased. They just stop introducing themselves. Dione feels like that, not dethroned, just elsewhere. The shrine hums with her absence, and yet somehow she's more present than ever. You touch the ground, and it's warm, sun-warmed, yes, but also heart-warmed, like it remembers bare feet, soft chanting doves rustling from nearby fig trees. A quirky note in ancient art, Dione was sometimes associated with birds, especially doves. Later, these symbols would be given entirely to Aphrodite. But the earlier art, the ones not shown in modern textbooks, they show Dione two-crowned with doves or flanked by them. Silent messengers of a queen whose language didn't need thunder or lions or lightning bolts. You gaze up at the olive tree again and spot a nest wedged in its gnarled arms. A dove sits quietly watching you, not startled, just aware. You nod, as if to say, yes. I see her. And the dove blinks, approves. Somewhere along the crumbled altar stones you find an inscription not in Greek, but in a dialect older than that barely preserved. It's translated loosely in your mind, half dream, half memory, to she who was first and still is. That's it. No list of titles, no thunderous epithets, no hymns longer than a shopping receipt. Just a truth so ancient it no longer needed elaboration. And suddenly you realize you've been asking the wrong question. Not who was Dione, but who are the women left behind when empires rename their gods? You rise slowly, careful not to disturb the stones, because this shrine may be in ruins. But it isn't abandoned. It's waiting for quiet footsteps, for fingertips tracing letters half erased, for a listener who understands that silence isn't absence, it's reverence. You walk on, and the dove stays in the tree, watching. Not because you're important, but because you remembered. The path ahead curves like a question mark. It leads you not upward, not downward, but sideways, the mythic equivalent of a whisper behind your shoulder. The air grows thinner, more metallic, as if carrying the scent of forgotten incense and burnt laurel. You brush past tall reeds and wild thyme until the brush clears, and you step onto flagstones polished smooth by centuries of uncertain footsteps. You're at the edge of Dodona, not the tourist-friendly version, not the one framed in plexiglass with multilingual placards. This is older, wilder, the bones of Dodona. The sacred grove that pulsed before Apollo hijacked prophecy and rebranded it under new management. Before Delphi, there was this. Before the marble, there were trees. And at the heart of those trees, a goddess, not Apollo, not even Zeus, though he later put his name on the door. Dione. You see them before you even know what you're seeing, the rusted iron rings hanging from what remains of an ancient oak. The chains are missing, but the implication lingers. This was where the oracles once stood, barefoot, unwashed, wild-eyed, and ungovernable. The Seloi, the priestesses of the whispering leaves, the ones who listen not to thunder but to trembling. You walk slowly now, reverently. Every step lands with a quiet thud, like knocking on the door of something still breathing beneath the soil. The grove is alive, not metaphorically. You feel it. The oak trees shift slightly even though there's no breeze. The ground hums faintly, not like a machine, but like a thought. Somewhere near the center, a stone basin catches your eye. Shallow, cracked, once used to catch rain or maybe tears. Beside it, a pillar engraved in a spiral script that wraps upward like ivy. You can't read it, but you understand it. It says, "We spoke and she heard. This was her place, Dionys, the oracle's forgotten mistress, and you can feel just how thoroughly she's been scrubbed out. Because today Everyone remembers Delphi, Apollo's golden voice, the dramatic smoke, the drugged priestess, the declarations delivered from a tripod like divine TED Talks. But Dodona was quieter, older. Here the gods didn't shout, they rustled. And before Zeus elbowed his way in, it was Dione who answered. There's evidence, fragments of lead tablets buried deep in the soil inscribed with private prayers, petitions about marriage, illness, livestock, fertility. People wrote their questions and pressed them into the earth, and many were addressed not to Zeus but to Dione. Historians still argue whether she was Zeus's equal in Dodona or perhaps his superior. Some say she was always a footnote. Others, more honest, suggest she was once the main note and only later demoted when the patriarchy decided one ruling sky dad was easier to sell than a pair of balanced, cosmic co-rulers. You walk further into the grove. The trees form a near-perfect circle, though no one planted them. The wind stirs now faintly, and you hear it, not a voice, not words, but something between sighing and singing. It curls around your ears like the memory of a lullaby sung when you were too young to understand the lyrics. And here's a quirky thing. Those priestesses, the Seloi, they didn't wash their feet. It wasn't laziness, it was ritual. They believed the dirt carried wisdom, that the earth transmitted messages up through the souls, through the bones, into the breath. So they left themselves open, unfiltered, unclean by modern standards, but pure in their receptivity. You look down at your own feet and feel a twinge of jealousy. You would have liked them. You would have listened too. There's an altar stone at the center. It's cracked, split clean down the middle. But instead of looking broken, it feels deliberate, like an invitation to look deeper beneath the surface of the myth, beneath the thunderbolts and the divine ego trips. You kneel and place your hand on the stone. Warm. Of course. And for a flicker of a moment you hear a voice. It doesn't speak your language, speak your... But your body understands it. Your spine straightens, your heart slows, your breath draws in like someone about to ask a question they already know the answer to. And then it's gone, but not really. Because now you know. Dione was never erased. She was planted, rooted like the trees, the moss, the soil. No longer a name shouted from the marble steps of a temple, but a presence humming beneath the roots of belief itself. The myths may have forgotten her, but the earth didn't, and neither have you. You rise, slowly brushing your hands together like you've just finished a sacred chore. You don't need an oracle to tell you what happens next. You just keep walking, listening, because somewhere in the wind and the trees and the rustling hush of leaves that remember how to speak, she is still answering. You leave the whispering grove behind, and the silence that follows is not absence, it's resonance. Like your ears are still ringing from a conversation your ancestors started. The trees thin into scrubland, and the path unwinds across a dry, stony plain. Here, the world feels exposed, the sky too wide, the myths too scattered. And yet everywhere you look you see her footprints, not literal ones, not fossilized goddess toes preserved in rock, but imprints. In the shrines built awkwardly atop older ones, in the stories that begin in the middle as though a whole chapter was deliberately torn out and lost beneath a council's desk. This is where the faceless goddesses live, the ones archaeologists catalogue as local fertility deity or possible mother figure terms used when no one wants to admit they've forgotten the name. You wander among the ruins of a town whose name no longer matters. The columns lean, The stones are scored with ancient etchings most illegible, some just vague outlines of women hips, wide arms, open eyes like dark moons. No one's entirely sure who they were. But they were once goddesses before their faces were shaved clean by time, before their names were filed into oblivion by scholars whose idea of history involved a lot more beards and war chariots than wombs and whispers. You walk into what was once a temple, not a great one. A modest hillside affair. The roof is long gone, but the floor mosaic remains. You brush off a layer of dust and see the shape of a woman holding a dove in one hand and a sheaf of barley in the other. No name, just silence. You lie down in the center of the mosaic, arms stretched out, letting the sunlight trace patterns across your closed eyelids. And you remember something strange. In the earliest forms of religion before Zeus, before even Cronus goddesses weren't side characters, they were everything. The earth, the rain, the grain, the moon, the dreams, the birth, the death, the wisdom, all wrapped into a singular divine presence. It wasn't that there weren't male gods, but they weren't in charge. They were supporting acts. Weather spirits, fertility companions, lovers sometimes, lightning flash cameos. It was the goddesses who held continuity. And then history happened. Cultures collided, cities grew, war became religion, and in the reshuffling, the divine feminine was demoted, not erased, just repackaged, rebranded. You sit up and walk further into the town ruins, past what was once a garden, now a tangle of wild thyme and thistle, but the shape is still there, a sacred square common in early goddess cult. Each corner of the garden represented something essential, water grain, breath, and memory. You stop at the memory corner. There's nothing there now but a flat rock. You sit on it. It's warm. You smile. She's still here. This is the point where someone might ask, if these goddesses were once so powerful, why didn't they stay in power? But that's the wrong question, because they did. Not in titles, not in statues, but in the weave of things. In the lullabies your grandmother hummed without remembering where they came from, in the feeling you get when you touch the earth and feel steadier than before, in the instinct to kneel by a spring, even if no one told you to. They're still here, not ruling, rooting. Quirky note. In parts of rural Greece, even today, older women still speak of the lady, not Mary, not Artemis, just her. A figure who watches the animals, keeps the gardens from blight and warns in dreams. When asked who she is, they shrug. She's always been. Historians still argue whether these folk beliefs are remnants of goddess worship or just poetic superstition. But you're not arguing, you're remembering. Because now you see what was done. The thrones weren't emptied, they were renamed. Metis became cleverness. Dione became a minor consort. Mnemosyne became a concept, and the queen, whoever she was before Hera, took the title, became space. The space around every named god, the silence that holds the noise, the breath, before a myth begins. You rise from the rock. You walk back into the sun. And though the town is silent, you swear you hear footsteps behind you, soft, bare, steady, not following, walking with you. You don't walk into the next place, you drift. The world around you softens into dusk and the sky burns quietly, like the last coal in a fire. Your feet carry you toward a gentle rise where wildflowers bloom in hues, so faded they almost seem imaginary, ash lavender, rust pink, moon yellow. The air tastes of time beeswax and the bitter memory of incense long extinguished. You reach the crest and see it, a sanctuary built into the hillside, its columns broken, its roof gone, but its foundation unmistakable. This was once a place of power, and now it's a shell, still, listening. You descend the stone steps slowly as though your movement might awaken the past too quickly. Below, an altar rests in shadow. There's no statue, no inscription, just an indentation where a presence once sat, too large to sculpt, too quiet to name. This is where the shift happened, where goddesses stopped being goddesses and started becoming metaphors. You've heard the story, haven't you? That tidy little version of the Greek pantheon, 12 Olympians, perfectly arranged, like action figures, each with a domain and a personality and a Wikipedia entry. A well-curated pantheon, easy to memorize, marketable, but it wasn't always like that. Once the gods were unruly, multiplying, changing names between villages, morphing from serpent to woman to rain cloud depending on the needs of the people. And the goddesses, they weren't constrained to love wisdom or hearth. They were everything. And that was a problem for someone, because you can't have order when the divine feminine runs the full spectrum. It's hard to build a patriarchal society when the oldest gods wear breasts and give birth to time. So what do? You streamline, you sort, you simplify, you erase. Not all at once, of course, that would be too obvious. You do it gradually, you clean up, you assign each goddess one neat label, something that can be taught to children and recited like a litany. You take Metis and fold her into Athena. You reduce Dione to Aphrodite's mom. You convert Rhea into a side note about Zeus's childhood. And Hera, you reframe her entirely from queen and co-ruler to jealous wife with a gold-plated grudge. Historians still argue whether this was a natural evolution of religious thought or a deliberate political maneuver by emerging patriarchal structures, state cults, war-driven societies, temple economies. But you feel the answer in your bones, because you're standing here now in a sanctuary meant for someone. And she isn't gone, she's just been tidied away. You walk toward the altar, kneel. Place your palm on the cold stone. And suddenly, not suddenly, you feel them. All of them, layered over each other like old paint, each goddess speaking through the cracks of the next. Metis whispers, strategy. Mnemosyne hums, memory. Dione lingers in the silence before the question is asked. Gaia waits beneath it all, slow and humming like an ancient drum. And above them, around them, Hera stands, not angry, not vengeful, but lonely. Because even she was recast, pressed into the role of wife so tightly that her divinity began to splinter. The erasure of queens didn't just delete their power, it narrowed it. From vast untamed forces to petty roles, from creators to accessories, from divinity to decoration. You stand slowly. The stone beneath your palm pulses, once faint, steady like a heartbeat, and now the air around you begins to shimmer. Not with light, with memory. You see them in brief flickers, a woman with a serpent coiled around her arm, a priestess painting stars on a newborn's forehead, a line of women walking barefoot to a sacred grove, singing in a language the wind still remembers. They aren't trying to return. They never left. You're not summoning them. You're noticing them. They don't need temples. They have memory. They don't need thrones. They have the roots of olive trees, the ink of forgotten poems, the whisper of dreams. A quirky artifact was once found near a buried temple, an offering bowl etched with a prayer, to she who was many before she was one. No one quite knows who it was meant for, but standing here you do. She isn't Hera. She isn't Dione. She isn't Metis. She is all of them. The feminine divine reduced for comfort now, stretching again through story, through shadow, through the soft curve of your breath. And maybe, just maybe, all she's ever asked of you is this: to remember she was more. The wind picks up as you leave the sanctuary, not wild but deliberate, threading through the cypress and fig trees like a hand, untangling old hair. It carries dust. Song, the faintest echo of a woman's voice speaking words you almost understand. You follow it. The path narrows again, becoming less a road and more a choice. You could turn back. Step out of the myth, rejoin the pantheon you were taught. The tidy dozen, the marketable myths. Or you keep walking, and of course you do, because now the story is too deep, too real, like a splinter of truth under your skin refusing to stay buried. You descend into a dry ravine, half-shadowed, rimmed with broken altars. The earth here is cracked, but still breathing. You can tell because the lizards pause to watch you and the olive branches don't creak, they listen. There on the lowest stone, the story continues. Hera's rise, Dione's fall. It's not a battle. There are no swords drawn, no divine catfight in the sky, no thunderous duel over a throne made of clouds and lightning. It's quieter than that. It's structural. You see Hera now, not the furious queen forever chasing Zeus's affairs like a divine tabloid scandal, but a figure carved from the bones of older goddesses. Her face is familiar, but her posture has changed, straighter, tighter, measured. She wasn't always the jealous wife. She used to be a ruler. You can trace the change across the centuries like rings in a tree. Early on, Hera is sovereign. Her own temples, her own priests, her own rites. She isn't introduced through her marriage to Zeus. She exists beside him, equal. But later, something shifts. Suddenly she's not a goddess in her own right. She's his wife. The queen, yes, but in service to the king. And Dione. She becomes a footnote in that shift. As Hera's domain expands curiously, almost surgically, Dione's contracts. They don't fight for space. One is simply absorbed while the other is elevated. Like pouring two wines into one glass and pretending the first bottle never existed. Historians still argue whether Dione was phased out as Hera's cult grew, or whether their domains simply overlapped so much that one name won the PR battle. Either way, Hera remained on Olympus, Dione did not, and yet you don't feel bitterness here, you feel resignation, not defeat, just endurance, like a queen stepping aside, not because she lost, but because she knew empires rise and fall, and stories do too. The altars around you reflect this. You see Hera's symbols etched boldly, the peacock, the scepter, the lotus-tipped staff, and beneath them, faint and fading, the dove, the moonflower, the open hand, Dione's. But something curious happens when you touch one of the stones. It shifts, not physically, but in your mind you see Hera differently. As a woman who's been rewritten so many times, she's forgotten her own original draft. You see her standing before a mirror, tracing her face, unsure whether the reflection belongs to her or to every myth maker who painted her as bitter, possessive, severe. What if Hera's rage wasn't petty? What if it was inherited? The rage of all the queens who came before her, Metis, Mnemosyne, Dione compressed into one character so the rest could be forgotten. She carries their ghosts whether she knows it or not. And the weight of them has bent her posture. You walk to the edge of the ravine and sit.
The sky above begins to blur into lavender and ash, and one by one, the stars wink open, slow, patient knowing. You look back toward the altar. You expect to see only Hera, but Dione is there too, or something that looks like her. They're not facing off, they're standing side by side, not rivals, layers, two facets of the same memory. You feel a quiet voice in your mind.
It doesn't speak in words, just in understanding. I stepped aside because the world changed, but I never disappeared. You close your eyes. You think of all the things women have been asked to give up to make room for kings. Names, voices, thrones, stories. And yet, here they are. Hera, Dione, still standing, still waiting to be seen, not as one replacing the other, but as continuity, because the divine feminine isn't a game of musical thrones, it's a lineage. And every queen erased from the page still lives in the margin, waiting for a reader like you. You leave the ravine in silence, your steps softened by something weightier than sand awareness. The myths don't lie, not exactly, but they do edit. They smooth out the edges, silence inconvenient voices, and stack gods in neat rows like museum statues with glowing nameplates. But the cracks, the gaps, that's where the real stories breathe. You follow a trail that no longer exists on maps. It curls upward, winding between pines and stones toward a cave, mouth half swallowed by ivy. The air cools as you approach, damp with the kind of stillness that makes sound feel rude. No birdsong here, just your heartbeat, and maybe, if you listen closely, pages turning. Inside the cave opens not into darkness, but into shelves, books, scrolls, tablets, inked fragments pinned to the walls with vines, a hidden archive untouched by time, or perhaps maintained by something that is time. You step inside, and there she is, not a goddess this time, a scribe, old but not frail, eyes sharp behind layers of wrinkles. She sits at a marble desk, feather quill in hand, transcribing a name over and over in precise looping script, the same name over and over, then crossing it out. You don't ask which name, you already know. Dione, Metis, Eurynome, Rhea, Themis, Cybele. Names you've already met. Names that disappeared not because no one remembered them, but because someone chose not to. She sees you, nods once, and keeps writing. This is the archivist of shadows, the one who records the erased. Her job is not to judge, not to protest, just to preserve what the world tries to forget. She gestures toward the wall behind her, where hundreds of names shimmer faintly in low light, like they're written in breath instead of ink. Some of them you recognize. Some you'll never pronounce, but all of them belong to someone sacred, someone worshipped, someone real. The archivist beckons you closer and lifts a scroll, a brittle thing barely holding together. You read the top line, deities removed for redundancy, Olympus Codex revision. 6, you laugh, quietly, bitterly. Even the divine get edited for brevity. One entry catches your eye. It reads, Dione, status obsolete. Function merged into Hera, administrative Aphrodite maternal, Artemis chaste, aspect regional variant. Cult disbanded circa 400 BCE. You shake your head. A goddess. Divided like a budget. But this isn't a tragedy. This is a revelation, because she's not gone. She's everywhere. You flip through another scroll field, notes from a wandering priestess who once recorded songs sung to the lady beneath the leaves. She wrote of rituals where no statue was needed, only silence and the presence of olive smoke. You see a tiny margin note in faint ink, possibly Dione, or whoever she was before the men named her. The archivist looks up from her work and finally speaks. Her voice is dry as papyrus, low as a lullaby. "You've come far," you nod. "I don't remember why I started." You remembered enough to start walking. She sets down her quill. They always try to trim the pantheon to make it neat, palatable, but gods aren't neat. You look at the shelves. How many names have been lost? She lifts one brow, lost to whom you smile. That's the point, isn't it? Nothing divine is ever truly lost, only misplaced, rebranded, shelved, forgotten by some, but remembered by someone. The archivist rises slow, deliberate, and leads you to a locked case. She doesn't open it. She doesn't need to. You already know what's inside. A scroll that never got written, a hymn that ends mid-line, a name whispered so softly it became wind. She places a hand on your chest. "Take it," she says. You don't feel anything physical, but something shifts in your bones, your memory, your story. You are now carrying a fragment of her, the one who was edited out. You blink, and the archive is gone. No cave, no shelves. Just you standing in a grove, hand over your chest, the echo of her voice still ringing through your ribs. A quirky tidbit for you archaeologists once found a tiny shard of pottery at Dodona with only a single letter etched into it. Just one, a D, the Greek delta. No one could explain it, but some believe it stood for Dione. Others say it meant begin. You walk forward, scroll unwritten, name unspoken, heart full, because now you're part of the archive, not to store it, to share it. You move through the trees like someone waking from a centuries-long dream. The scroll may be invisible, but you feel its weight, not heavy, just present, like a breath held in the chest of the world, waiting to be exhaled. You walk into a strange courtyard. At first it looks like a museum, not the shiny kind with fluorescent lights and glass display cases, but the abandoned kind, the kind where everything valuable has been removed and what remains are dust outlines and odd remnants, empty plinths, broken columns, forgotten corners, and statues, so many statues, all of women, all faceless. You move slowly among them. Some are missing heads. Others have hands lifted in gestures that once made sense, now frozen mid-thought. A few still have faint traces of paint rouge on a cheek, a bit of blue hem clinging to a carved robe. No names, no plaques, just unknown female figure. You recognize the label. You've seen it before. Museums are full of them. Unidentified woman, possible priestess, unknown deity. It's the ancient equivalent of some lady, we guess. And somehow you know better now. These aren't nobodies, they're queens, gods, forgotten not because they were unimportant, but because they were inconvenient. You pause in front of one statue that catches your breath. She's seated. Her posture is regal but relaxed, like she's about to offer advice or judgment, whichever you need more. One hand rests on her lap. The other points downward toward the earth. You kneel and brush away the dust at her feet. They're almost too faint to see as a single carving Dione. It's scratched, sloppy, like it was added in haste after the fact. But it's there. And it's enough. You stand slowly, letting your fingers trail along the curve of her marble arm. This place isn't just a dump site for broken idols. It's a monument to what was deemed excess. Too many goddesses, too many names, too many ways to be divine. So they streamlined 12 Olympians, neat, manageable, primarily male. They needed Hera to be the queen, so Dione became a shadow. They needed Athena to be born without a mother, so Metis was swallowed. They needed Apollo to be the god of prophecy, so Dodona was corrected. Historians still argue whether these changes reflect religious evolution or political convenience. But looking at this statue, her faceless calm, her silent dignity, you don't need academic footnotes to know what happened. They didn't forget her. They removed her. A quirky fragment from ancient papyrus records a ritual where women would bake bread in the shape of a seated goddess and bury it in the fields for luck. The ritual had no official deity assigned to it. The women simply called her the Lady Who Knows. You wonder how many broken breads and scattered names lie beneath these fields. You wander deeper into the courtyard. Statues lean at odd angles as if straining to speak. Some wear laurel crowns. Others cradle birds, snakes' bowls or books. All different, yet somehow familiar. They're not separate goddesses, they're versions. You begin to see it now. Dione wasn't the only one erased. She was just the beginning. The reduction didn't stop with her. It swallowed Artemis's wildness. It tamed Demeter's grief. It sanitized Aphrodite's rage. It narrowed them all, tightened their definitions until goddesses became manageable, collectible, safe. You sit on the low step of a fallen colonnade and look at the field of statues.
They stare back, eyeless and unblinking, but not cold, not mournful, just waiting. And you understand they don't need their faces returned. They need to be seen, not with the eyes, but with memory, with acknowledgement, with presence. You reach into your pocket and feel the feather again, the one that appeared after Metis whispered her way through Zeus's skull. You hold it out. Let it catch the wind. It lifts, spirals, floats upward higher and higher until it disappears against the violet sky. The statues don't move, but you do. Something inside you shifts, aligns. You're no longer just a listener. You're a participant, a witness, a bearer of the names. You rise. The courtyard behind you does not fade. It follows in your thoughts, in your breath, in the way you will one day tell someone, "Did you know?" And just like that, she is remembered. You step beyond the courtyard of nameless statues, and the landscape opens like a sigh.
The air feels thinner here, high up, as if you're nearing the edge of myth, or perhaps the place where myths are made. Mountains ripple in the distance, their peaks soft with haze, their bases wrapped in mist. And yet in this lofty silence you hear something unexpected. Music, not a melody exactly, more like wind chimes struck by chance, tones that seem to follow you, adjust to you, beckon you. You follow the sound. It leads you to a plateau, fringed with wind-tossed grasses and low white stones. No shrine this time, no columned ruin. Just a wide open sky and a woman seated cross-legged at the edge of the world. She's not a statue, not a goddess, not even perhaps real, but she feels real. Her robes are stitched with stars, not embroidered, stitched. You see them glint and flicker as she moves. Her face shifts like light on water, sometimes young, sometimes ancient, always watching. You sit across from her. She says nothing, but her silence carries questions. You've met Hera, Dione, Metis, Mnemosyne, Rhea. The names swirl behind your eyes like constellations forming their old patterns again. And now you meet her source, the one the Greeks didn't name, or perhaps they did once before the records were lost or changed or carved over. Some scholars have argued for decades that certain Greek goddesses, especially Dione, have Eastern roots. Not Greek, not even Indo-European, older, Phoenician, Anatolian, Mesopotamian. Fragments of clay tablets from Ugarit describe a sky bride, a goddess who ruled beside the storm god Baal. She was called Baalat, Lady, Queen of Heaven. She held a dove in one hand, a staff in the other. She was not his lesser. Some believe that image travelled west, morphed, adapted, became Dione, became Hera, became the wife. Historians still argue whether the similarities are coincidence, cultural blending, or deliberate reinterpretation by Greek poets reshaping foreign myths for local palates.
But the woman in front of you, she's none of that. She's not a goddess of anything. She's just a goddess, unreduced. Before the labels, before the rewrites, she reaches into her robe and pulls out a single object, a bird feathered in shimmering blues and silvers, a dove. It perches on her hand for a moment, then lifts into the air and vanishes. No flourish, no divine trumpet, just gone. She smiles. You ask the question that's been pressing at your tongue for miles. Were you her Dione? Her answer comes not in words, but in a breeze that moves across the plateau, curling behind your ears like a bedtime whisper. I was many. It hits you. Then this was never about restoring a forgotten name. It was about undoing the forgetting. Because Dione may have been a name, but the presence beneath the name, the present behind the thunder, the memory, the wisdom that has never left. You glance up at the sky and realize something strange. There are no stars.
Just the hint of stars, the feeling of them behind a gauze of clouds, as if they're waiting for nightfall to reappear, like her, like them. You stand and the woman rises with you. She doesn't bow, she doesn't vanish in a sparkle of light. She simply steps into the wind and dissolves, not into nothingness, into everything. A quirky bit of trivia from a crumbling temple wall in Phrygia mentions a goddess who had no name but all titles. Her symbol, a bird, always in flight, never caged. Scholars dismissed it as poetic abstraction, but now you get it. Because she's not a character, she's not a relic, she's pattern, a thread woven through Mesopotamia, through Crete, through Dodona and beyond. Each culture tried to name her, own her, contain her, but she slipped through every pantheon like wind through reeds. She was Dione, and also not. You turn to leave the plateau, and in the dirt beneath your feet, the grasses bend into faint letters, not Greek, not Latin, just a message. He, still here? You smile and begin your descent, lighter now, because once you see her, really see her, you carry her with you. And the forgetting ends. The descent is steep, but not harsh. The air thickens with warmth as you follow the slope into a meadow, flanked by whispering olive trees. The ground grows softer beneath your feet, padded by fallen leaves and petals that never seem to rot. A quiet path curls ahead like a ribbon, dropped by accident, and you, still holding her name in your chest, step into the space between symbols. The wind smells like rosemary. And just ahead, nestled in the crook of two leaning stones, you see it, a symbol. Two objects laid side by side, one ancient, one newer, both gleaming under the dimming sky. A thunderbolt and a dove. Not a statue, not even a shrine. Just arrangement. Two icons placed with intent, like the punchline of a divine joke or a message from someone who knew you'd pass through here eventually. Zeus's power and Dione's peace, side by side, not warring, not blending, competing for space. You sit before them and let your eyes trace their lines, the jagged bolt of aggression and rule, and the soft arc of feathers and stillness. One shaped to strike, the other shaped to fly. And you realize you've been taught that Olympus chose the bolt, that Zeus won, that kingship came down like a hammer and reorganized the sky. But did it? Because the bolt is here, yes, but it's resting, it's not raised, it's not in motion. And the dove, She's looking upward, still poised to rise. There's a fringe theory, one that earns side eyes at scholarly conferences and chuckles in footnotes, that Zeus and Dione weren't always separate forces, that they began as a paired divinity, storm and sky, wife voice, an echo, order and wisdom. Two aspects of the same cosmic engine. Only later did Zeus take precedence. The bolt was easier to explain, more impressive, better suited for tales of conquest and courtrooms. But even in the mainstream myths, the bolt doesn't work without counsel, without Metis, without Themis, without Hera's laws, without Dione's quiet certainty that justice can arrive as a whisper just as surely as a roar. You look again at the dove. She's carved with eyes open, not passive, but observant. She doesn't flee. She waits. You feel that now, not in a metaphorical way, but viscerally. She's been waiting all this time for someone to notice that the myth never balanced, that something was missing, not a character, a principle. The divine feminine not as a side character or symbol of love, but as a governing force in her own right. Equal, co-creator, woven into the architecture of Olympus before the walls were finished. You close your eyes and let yourself picture it, not Olympus as a patriarchal mountain with Zeus on top, but as a partnership, a court where law and wisdom stood side by side, where thunder asked permission before striking, where memory was sacred, where presence mattered more than spectacle, a court where Dione still had her place, not as the forgotten queen, but as the unspoken balance, and slowly a strange thing happens. You begin to hear voices, not loud, not even coherent, just tones, the murmur of wind through reeds, the hum of bees returning to their hive, the rustle of fabric in ancient sanctuaries, voices that have been speaking all along, just too soft for the thunder to hear. But you hear them. And now that you do, you realize you've always been hearing them. In lullabies, in prayers said without words, in every instinct that told you the story was more complicated than you were taught. You sit with the thunderbolt and the dove, and you feel no need to choose, because the story wasn't meant to be either or. It was meant to be both. The bolt without the dove is violence. The dove without the bolt is silence. But together they rule. There's a saying scratched into an ancient potsherd found near Dodona. When the storm comes, she steadies the sky. No one knows who she was, but now you do. She was here before the bolt. She will be here after it falls. She isn't noise, she's balance. And she's watching not from above, but from within. You rise, leaving the symbols untouched, but not unnoticed. They don't need your worship, just your remembrance. The path winds again, looping gently through fields overgrown with herbs and tall grasses. The olive trees thin out and wild fennel sways at your knees. Crickets begin their evening song, steady and hypnotic. Each step you take feels less like walking and more like being carried by the wind, by memory, by something older than maps. And then you see it, a grove within a grove. Moonlight filters through branches so thick they form a roof, but beneath that canopy is a clearing. And in that clearing faint footsteps bear, and many have worn circles into the earth, not roads, not rituals, routines. This was once a sacred place, but not in the formal sense. No priests, no processions, no sacrificial bulls, just women and trees, and a name whispered not upward toward heaven, but inward toward the roots, the cults they buried. You step softly into the circle and find yourself surrounded by altars grown into trees. Small ones knee-height, curved with age, not designed for drama. These were places for gentle offerings, a bowl of milk, a twist of honeyed bread, a tuft of wool knotted with prayers. Dione's name isn't written here, but it is here. You feel it in the soil, in the soft hum that rises when the wind filters through the leaves just right. These were her people, and they didn't need statues to speak to her. They used silence, they used moonlight, they used the dove. You spot one now, sitting high in a nearby branch, watching you the way gods watch, without blinking, without explanation. There's a scholarly footnote in a neglected tome somewhere that mentions these kinds of groves' unofficial regional female run, often condemned by later religious authorities as superstitious or uncivilized. They weren't large, they weren't loud, but they were persistent. Historians still argue whether these informal cults were remnants of earlier matriarchal religions or simply localized folk practices that refused to bow to the centralized Olympian model. You kneel in the center of the circle, hand pressed to the ground, and you feel them. Not ghosts, not memories, continuities. Women who lit candles with no name attached to the flame. Women who prayed not for miracles, but for clarity. Women who remembered a time when gods didn't sit on thrones, they walked among barley and olives, spoke through rain, answered through dreams. You open your eyes and see a few objects left behind, a clay oil lamp blackened but whole, a stone pestle worn by centuries of use, and a single fragment of terracotta etched faintly with a design, a woman holding a branch in one hand and a bird in the other. Not Hera, not Aphrodite, not Athena, just her, a blend of all, or maybe the origin of them all. A quirky local tale, rarely recorded, speaks of the Lady of the Quiet Flame, a goddess invoked only when no one else would listen. She was never summoned with hymns, only sighs. She answered slowly, but she always answered. The grove feels like that. A sanctuary built not for spectacle, but for certainty. You see now why Dione never needed to shout. She had this. Women who remembered even when their stories were no longer written, even when their statues were decapitated and their symbols reassigned, even when they were told their rituals were primitive, unnecessary, dangerous. Still they came, still they lit the lamp, still they offered bread, and still she answered, not in thunder, not in vision, but in steadiness. You sit for a long time, there's no rush here. The world outside spins its politics, its pantheons, its new gods, rising every decade with hashtags and marketing campaigns. But here, stillness reigns, and in that stillness she survives. You rise as the moon breaks through the trees, silvering the grove. You don't take anything with you, except the silence. And that is enough. As you leave, the dove follows not with urgency, but with trust. She knows you've heard. She knows you'll carry it. The cults they buried. They weren't buried, they were planted, and now in you they bloom. Night has fallen fully now. A warm one, the kind that smells like figs and resin and cooling stone. The stars sprawl overhead, not arranged neatly like a museum display, but wild and scattered like old gods who refuse to be alphabetized. You're walking toward a hill you didn't know was there. Not a steep one, just enough to pull your breath slightly and make you feel like you're rising into something important. As you near the top, the wind picks up again. This time, carrying not a whisper, but a question. What if the 12 Olympians weren't meant to be 12? What if 12 was a number chosen, not remembered? At the summit, there's a stone bench, worn smooth, facing the sky. You sit and begin to feel the problem with the familiar myth. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, or sometimes Dionysus, depending on who's making the list, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Hermes, Aphrodite. 12. Tidy, complete, a perfect council, but too perfect, too modern. You've met enough gods by now to know Olympus wasn't born in balance. It was arranged. Historically speaking, the 12-god model doesn't appear in Greece until surprisingly late, about the 5th century BCE. Before that, the gods vary wildly from region to region. Some lists don't include Aphrodite at all. Others have Persephone or Hecate, or even foreign imports like Cybele elbowing into the circle. There's a stone tablet in ancient Priene that shows a neat ring of 12 deities, but several names are scratched out, replaced, shuffled like mythological trading cards. Historians still argue whether this was political propaganda, a cultic preference, or just someone getting nervous about who made the final cut. And while they argue, you're sitting here on this hill realizing what the numbers tried to erase. Dione was never in the 12, but maybe she was. Before the committee formed, before the marble was carved, before God meant temple donations and epic poems, back when the divine meant something sprawling, murky, intimate. You look up at the stars, not the zodiac ones, the ones no one remembers the names of, and you start to see her shape in them, not a constellation, a presence, a curve made of unlit spaces between the famous stars. She doesn't form a lion or a hunter, she forms the gap between, the space that gives the others context, and suddenly the 12 look lonely. 12 thrones filled mostly with gods who either shout, fight, seduce, or scheme. But where's the presence that listens? Where's the stillness, the softness, the sanctuary? A quirky historical tidbit. In an obscure fragment of Hesiod's lost works, there's a reference to a 13th presence, unnamed, invisible, unseated, but always watching the council. It was likely poetic. Or maybe not, because what you see now is that Dione wasn't cut from the list. She stood outside of it, willingly, because she didn't need a throne to influence Olympus. She had roots. The 12 ruled by decree, but she ruled by resonance. She was the reason the gods paused before making a decision, the reason oracles murmured answers they didn't understand, the reason temples had silence built into their structure. The divine pause, the unspoken consideration, the queen behind the curtain. You realize you've stopped blinking. The sky above you pulses quietly and one of the stars winks out. Then another. Not dying, just resting. And in their absence her shape grows clearer. You lie back on the bench, the stone surprisingly warm, and exhale slowly. Dione wasn't missing from Olympus. Olympus was missing her. And maybe that's what you've been feeling all along, not a goddess trying to claw her way back into memory, but a goddess gently waiting for someone to notice where she already was. You. Here. Now. Not a myth. A presence. Still breathing. Still shining. Just not in the catalogue. The stars blur as your eyes grow heavier, but the story continues softly now, like a hand brushing through your hair, careful not to wake you fully. You're lying still, but you feel movement slow, cyclical, like the turning of a wheel, long buried under layers of dust and doctrine. You rise from the bench and descend the hill. Below you torchlight flickers, not the kind from festivals or feasts, but from a quiet vigil. A circle of people, shadows mostly. No words spoken, just the light, just the waiting. You step into their circle and no one flinches. They've been expecting you. In the center stands a young woman, eyes closed, arms extended not in grandeur, but surrender. Before her is a vessel carved from onyx low and wide. Floating within it are herbs, petals, feathers, and in the center, gently glowing, an object you've seen before, a helmet. Athena's, but not just Athena's, because tonight you'll hear a theory that's been whispered, but rarely spoken aloud. Athena had another mother, one before Zeus, or within him, a presence not just absorbed, but merged. Metis, yes, but perhaps Dione too. The idea isn't mainstream. It makes classical scholars squirm. It disrupts the neatness of Athena's miraculous birth. No mother, only father. A goddess sprung fully armored from the mind of Olympus's king. A perfect story, a tidy one, too tidy. You peer into the onyx basin and the water ripples, not with your breath, but with hers. The presence, the one behind Athena's calm resolve, her impossible wisdom, her refusal to scream even when holding a spear. Some say Athena is Zeus' favorite because she mirrors him, but others argue she mirrors Metis. And deeper still beneath the layers of thunder and intellect are echoes of Dione, the one who taught how to rule by understanding, not conquering. You see it now. Athena isn't a paradox, a virgin of war, a daughter with no womb, a mind with no origin. She's a fusion, a convergence of mothers who were never allowed to keep their names. Metis strategy, Mnemosyne memory, Dione wisdom as quiet presence. Together they shaped her. Zeus may have provided the vessel, but the contents, they were hers. The woman before you opens her eyes and speaks not to the group, not even aloud, but to the sky. Mother of the mind, she whispers, we remember. A quirky footnote from a lesser-known philosopher, possibly a student of Pythagoras, once wrote, "No daughter of Zeus could be wise unless her mother lived in his silence." It was dismissed for centuries, but you hear it now. The water in the basin stills. The helmet sinks gently beneath its surface. No splash, just stillness. And something in your chest unclenches. You've spent the journey searching for a throne, a name, a face. But maybe that was never the point. Maybe her power was never in presence. It was in permeation. She is the background intelligence of Olympus, the pause in Athena's judgment, the calm before Hera's wrath, the hush that follows Artemis through the forest. You rise from the circle and no one stops you.
Because you've learned the trick of old goddesses. They don't teach by decree. They teach by staying. As you walk from the vigil, you carry her with you again, not as a name, as an influence, because the gods built palaces, but she built gods. And she's still building. In every whisper of intuition, in every moment someone chooses wisdom over wrath. In every time you hear a voice inside, you say, wait, listen, try again. She's there, not remembered, not forgotten, just known. The path ahead narrows, again pressed on both sides by tall cypress trees, swaying gently, their shadows long and soft like brushstrokes on a silk canvas. The stars above blur into silver smears, and the sky pulses low with the deep blue of approaching dreams. You've passed through sanctuaries, stood beneath oaks that whisper prophecy, touched offerings left by hands now long returned to the earth. You've seen Dione in silence, in doves in marble, too faded to sell to tourists.
And now, you reach a place that doesn't want to be reached. A door, wooden old, warped by time, built into a cliffside, no handle, no lock, just a feeling. You press your palm against it, and it opens without sound. Inside there is no grand chamber, no throne, just a small room, one window, a low burning oil lamp, and a scroll, unrolled halfway, its script, delicate looping, a hymn, but it's unfinished. You read the words aloud, softly, feeling them more than understanding them. She who holds the breath of stars, she who waits beneath the name, she whose throne is wind, whose crown is hush. And then it ends, mid-line, mid-breath, mid-thought. There's no damage, no fire, no water stains. The hymn simply stops. As though the writer laid down their quill, looked out the window, and decided the rest didn't need to be written. This is the hymn never sung, a tribute not to glory, but to knowing. You sit at the desk. Your fingers itch to write, to finish what was started, but that's not your role, that's the point. Some stories are left unfinished on purpose, not because they were forgotten, but because they were meant to be lived instead. You see, now Dione didn't need a complete hymn. She needed a listener, a witness, you. There's a theory, unpopular poetic, that some goddesses chose anonymity, that their true worship was not in temples or public rites, but in the inner sanctum of human memory, the private awe, the soft gasp when the moon breaks through clouds, the wordless prayer muttered before sleep. A fragment discovered in a grave near Pella, dated to the 4th century BCE, includes this line, "To the goddess whose name I forgot, but whose peace I carried." Historians still argue whether it referred to Dione Hecate or a regional nymph. But maybe it didn't matter, maybe the name wasn't the point. You stand and walk to the window. Outside the sea shimmers, no ships, no thunderbolts, just light, soft and scattered. And you feel it again, that sacred patience. The presence not above, but around. The kind of divinity that doesn't announce itself, but lingers in the spaces no one thought to look. You think of every moment in your life where wisdom arrived, not like a shout, but like a whisper. You think of the instinct to wait before speaking, of the strange comfort of ancient trees, of the invisible hand that steadies you in grief. All of those were her hymns, not sung, felt. You leave the room and close the door behind you. No latch, no ritual, just a quiet click. As though the story knows you've heard enough to carry it forward. As you descend the slope back toward the world of time and names and noise, you hum the beginning of the hymn again. And it feels complete, even though it isn't. Because now, you are the ending. The night is heavier now, rich with scent and silence. Not oppressive, just full. Like something that's settled over the land, a velvet weight, pulled over the shoulders of the world. You walk through it slowly, reverently, not quite returning to the mortal realm, but not fully in the realm of myth anymore either. You exist between, and it suits you. You come upon a structure low and ancient, half-collapsed, more rubble than temple. Time has worked on it like a sculptor, shaving away columns and softening sharp corners until only the shape remains, a skeleton of stone. There are no doors, no offering bowls, no altar, just 3 steps worn down in the middle by centuries of footfalls. You climb them and sit. You are here for the marriage erased. And no, this isn't the story you think it is. Not Hera's grudging vows, not Zeus's wandering eye. This is a quieter ceremony rumoured in a handful of obscure texts, hinted at in pottery fragments, suggested in inscriptions that end abruptly as if someone changed their mind while chiselling. This is the myth of Zeus and Dione. As partners, as equals. There is a lost play, its title known, its content missing, called Zeus Before the Thunder. Scholars believe it may have depicted a time before he was king, before his weapon, before Olympus. In it, there is mention of a union, not conquest, not seduction, a joining. Zeus and Dione ruling side by side, she of prophecy and patience, he of change and sky. Together not yet storm, not yet order, but potential. An early, fragile version of Olympus where decisions were made through counsel, not decree. But of course it didn't last, because thunder is loud and memory is quiet. And when it came time to write the official stories, the ones recited in courts and carved in marble, she was removed, not divorced, erased. You try to imagine it. A wedding where the vows were shared beneath trees, not shouted from thrones. Where she placed a crown not on her own head, but on his as a gesture of trust. Where he knelt, not in submission, but in awe of the one who came before. And you realize something. Zeus may have been the storm, but she was the sky he moved through, the medium, the expanse, the context. Some scholars have noted that in Homer's Iliad, Dione appears, but only briefly, as Aphrodite's mother. It's a strange cameo. She comforts Aphrodite when wounded, speaking with authority, with tenderness, but then she disappears. It's the kind of role a queen might be given after being dethroned. You wonder if Homer knew, if in his countless verses he left just one glimpse for those paying attention. If his Dione wasn't just a mother but a remnant of a forgotten reign. A quirky anecdote: at an excavation near Thesprotia, a ring was found engraved with two figures side by side, one with a thunderbolt, the other with a dove. There was no label. The museum marked them as Zeus and Hera, likely, but the style was older than Hera's cult in the region. Possibly Dione, possibly before. You look up at the stars again. They blink, soft, unhurried. You wonder how many gods were joined before they were divided. How many queens helped build Olympus, only to be written out of the lease. You rise and look out over the ruins. No one remembers this wedding. There are no hymns for it, no plays, no shrines. But the stones do. They press against your feet with warmth, with memory, with something like hope. Because every erased marriage leaves behind an imprint, a sense of what should have been, what was if, only briefly. You walk down the steps, leaving behind the place of their union. You don't mourn, you honor, because love doesn't vanish when the ink does. And marriages erased from myth, they still echo in the quiet parts of the soul, where lightning waits to be born, and the sky remembers who gave it space to speak. You wander now with no destination, only direction. Downwards slightly. Not toward darkness, but into depth. The world is hushed, like it's holding its breath for your next realization. You pass through a stone arch nearly overtaken by vines. No inscription marks it. No clear meaning declares itself, but you feel it. This is a place of listening, and beneath your feet the stones begin to hum, not loudly, not musically, just a subtle, steady awareness, as though the ground itself knows you've come to hear something long overdue. You're in echoes in the stones. A temple once stood here, not one of grandeur, but of function. Delphi may have gotten the headlines, but here in the foothills of an older range, people came to speak their fears into the rock and wait, not for Apollo, not for Athena, not even for Zeus, but for her. There's a cracked column here with only half a word left, Ione. You already know the rest. You kneel beside a fragment of wall where the plaster still clings in faded ochre. A mural, almost gone, depicts a woman with one hand over her heart and the other, extended outward palm, open fingers, relaxed. No crown, no thunderbolt, no animal at her feet, just listening. You run your hand along the wall and feel a texture difference and indentation just behind the paint, a series of ridges, carved words once filled with pigment. You trace them. She heard me when no one else did. A phrase repeated over and over, dozens of times, different hands, same words. Some believe this place once belonged to a small cult of Dione operating long after her official worship had waned. Others say it wasn't a cult at all, just people who remembered, who needed a goddess not for conquest or favour, but for witness. There's a scholarly debate about these kinds of inscriptions. Some call them graffiti, others devotional text. A few see them as desperate people praying to a forgotten goddess out of superstition or loneliness. But when you sit here in the low light in the carved-out silence, you don't feel desperation. You feel relief. These people weren't begging for miracles. They were asking to be seen. And she saw them. You close your eyes. You speak nothing. You think, and still you feel the stones respond, not with answers, with acknowledgement. That's her gift. She doesn't fix. She receives. A quirky little artifact was found buried in this very hill, a votive offering shaped like an ear. Not two ears, not a face, just one perfect, delicate carved from alabaster. An ear set into a small base with one word scratched underneath, Dione. No one could explain it. But maybe it doesn't need explanation. Maybe that's what she was. The ear of Olympus, the listener before justice was codified into thunder, the comfort before law became punishment. You move deeper into the ruins and find a bench. It's shaped like a crescent moon set low to the ground. You sit.
No shrine faces you, no priest speaks, but you feel held, like the stones themselves are saying we remember. The sky above is dim now, stars thick in the black. But you don't look up, you look down, because that's where she always was, not exalted, rooted. You wonder how many temples were raised to make room for marble ones with names easier to carve. How many of these stones carry hymns that were never written, but still echo through hands that touched them? You rest your hand on one, it feels warm. Of course it does, because gods carved in gold sit in museums, but goddesses like her, they live in stone, in shadow, in memory that refuses to die, even when it's been quiet for millennia. You stay until the wind picks up. Not cold, comforting. It curls around your ear. You lean toward it the way a child leans into a lullaby. And in the breath between gusts, you hear her again. Not a voice. An understanding. I heard you.
By now your footsteps make no sound. The world around you responds to your presence the way a cave responds to a whisper, softly, curiously, with just enough echo to let you know you're not alone. The trail dips through dry brush and olive root, then leads into an opening framed by stacked stones, neat, deliberate. You duck inside and find yourself in a narrow corridor, lit only by a row of flickering votive flames, each dancing quietly in its terracotta bowl. This is no temple, no court, no ruined monument. This is the chamber of what was not lost. And here, tucked beneath the earth and time, is something astonishing. A library, not one of scrolls and shelves. The walls are the library. They're carved, floor to ceiling, tight, swirling scripts. You can't read all of it. Some words are chipped. Some language is unfamiliar, but you recognize names, not just of gods and heroes, but of women. Many, many women, each name a thread woven into stone. You brush your fingers across the script and feel a pulse, like a heartbeat, or a memory waking up. You begin to read fragments. She spoke truth to the river, and it stilled. She wept once, and the figs grew sweeter that year. They tried to erase her, but their knives grew dull. You feel dizzy, but not from standing too fast, from realization. This is not a shrine to Dione. This is a record of what she did, of what she was, of the parts they couldn't erase because they weren't loud but embedded, not in war, not in birth, in continuity. You sit down beside a column inscribed with a peculiar illustration, one you haven't seen before. A woman seated beneath an olive tree surrounded by a lion, a crane, and a child. Each leans toward her as though listening. She doesn't speak. She receives. Above her head, written in looping letters, is one phrase: the center that was never the throne. A scholar might call it metaphor. You know better now. It's geometry. Olympus spun around her, even after they forgot. Even after they rebranded the myths, updated the scripts, hired flashier gods with better publicists. Even now. She is still the center, still the stillness, still the breath between thunder and flame. Historians still argue whether Dione was ever truly worshipped widely or simply a poetic leftover, a placeholder, until Hera's cult grew powerful enough to dominate. They count shrines, they count coins, they forget to count what can't be counted. Influence, tone, resonance. You find another corner carved more deeply where the script takes on a rhythmic pulse like a chant. She is the silence in the courtroom. She is the calm before reply. She is the pause that makes the sentence. She is the weight behind the sigh. A lull settles over the room. The flames flicker again. One goes out, then another. You rise, not startled, not afraid, invited. The room doesn't empty, it closes gently, like a book being shut by a careful hand. You step back into the corridor, and the stones behind you begin to blur just slightly, as though your presence allowed them to be visible, just this once. You know now what they hold. Not secrets, reminders. That truth doesn't need to be trending to be eternal, that gods with spears may write the stories, but it's the quiet ones who write the world. You step into the night again. It's near dawn. The stars have softened, and so have you, because you carry now a chamber full of stories never told aloud yet never lost. They live in your pulse, in your breath, in the hush before you speak, and you know, with the certainty of myth, she is not waiting to be remembered. She already is. The sky is no longer dark, but it isn't light either. You walk through the hour the poets forgot to name, that liminal hush between night and dawn where everything holds its breath and even time seems reluctant to move. Shadows stretch longer, but not darker. The air carries a softness like the afterglow of incense in a temple long closed. You're back on the mountain path now. The same one that led you to the beginning, only now it's not the same. Because you are not the same. This has been a pilgrimage, yes, but not to a shrine, to a presence, and you feel it behind you, not following, accompanying. The gentle, knowing presence of Olympus's forgotten queen. But here's the secret you've come to understand: she was never really forgotten, because to forget, you must first stop carrying. And no one ever did. They whispered her in childbirth. They felt her in grief. They poured wine for her in secret when other gods refused to answer. She was never the face on the coin. She was the hand that passed it between women with no name carved in history's marble. You reach a plateau now where the first breeze of dawn begins to lift the olive leaves. You sit on a cool stone. And you breathe. You think of all the times silence guided you more wisely than advice. All the times a pause changed a fate, all the moments in your own life where you listened to the quiet instinct, and it was right. That was her. Not lightning, not spectacle, just presence. A quirky belief survives in parts of rural Epirus that if you sit silently at twilight just before dawn and think of someone you lost, Dione will pass through your thoughts and carry the message for you. Not to heaven, just to memory. The memory that doesn't belong to you alone, but to the world. And as the first light edges across the horizon, you finally understand. You were never supposed to find Dione, you were supposed to feel her. In every moment the world softened around you. In every echo that answered before you spoke. In the hush after thunder, in the quiet strength of things that refuse to vanish, you close your eyes. And now she speaks, not aloud, not in words, but in you.
In the way you know what is wise, in the way you carry stillness into noisy rooms, in the way you choose to notice what others ignore. This is not the end of the story. This is where you take it with you. Because while others worship the thunder and flame, you've met the goddess of the breath between, and you are not alone, not ever again. Now let your breath fall gently like olive leaves drifting in still morning air. There's nothing more you need to seek tonight. No revelations left to uncover. The presence you found soft, steady, unseen by most, is still with you. And always was. Let your eyes grow heavy now. There's no need to hold on to every detail of this journey. The symbols, the ruins, the quiet chambers of forgotten memory, let them melt into mist behind your closed eyes. If you feel a warmth in your chest, that's her. Stillness made sacred, a name that doesn't need to be spoken to be known.
You've walked the silent paths of an ancient queen, not worshipped for glory, but honored for grace. And now with each slow breath, that grace becomes yours. Let the silence grow deeper. Let the thoughts drift further. The stories will stay with you, gently woven into your dreams, asking nothing, promising only presence. You are safe here, held, known, not for what you say, but for what you hear. Tonight, you are the temple. Tonight, you are the hymn. And the goddess you met, she remains, soft as breath, still as stone, endlessly near. So go on, close your eyes, sleep, and let the myth continue where only dreams can reach. End of script. Sweet dreams.